I should probably start by congratulating the Institute, because indeed for many years the Institute was my address also in Vienna. It was during our transition, it was during my work in UN and later on also in the Commission. It was very often about the Western Balkans that we had the discussions. I'm very grateful to Mike Landesman that he kept me in and that he remembered me also and invited me today. It's very important for me personally. So I once again, thank you. Thank you for being, thank you also for speaking to you, and also to be able to look with you together at all the challenges that we as European integration are facing in the light of this geopolitical complicated environment. And I know that this is the topic, listening to all the speakers, and you are probably in Europe the only place where you are allowed to, your guests, to speak for more than 2 minutes, because in the Parliament we are working like this. So I thank you very much also for this generosity. But I think that all those topics that were mentioned today already, and then will continue to be mentioned, they will keep us all for a long time to come very occupied. And I hope this is also true for the Institute, because the world indeed finds itself now in a challenging moment, hopefully not too long in terms of time, and it is restless. I hope that a great reassessment is underway. It is a time, somebody mentioned already today, emotions, and I think it is a time of great anxiety, but also of an evident twitch for a change. And I think in any historical epoch, such a moment is a risky one. It can either be a beginning of a renaissance or lead humanity straight into the abyss, and it will not happen. It will depend on what we all will do. And I think that, frankly, that Vienna, if you allow me to make this kind of Zwischenruf, with Sigmund Freud's tradition of psychoanalysis and with writers like Robert Musil, like Stefan Zweig or Elfriede Jelinek, who wrote about such historical convulsions, is a good place to talk about this unpredictability of history and about the, which is my hope, inevitability of transformation. And the recent 2 black swans, because we had more of them, the pandemic, this unthinkable until not long ago war in Ukraine, arrived one after another. They forced us fundamentally to reevaluate our way of thinking about the resilience of our democratic structures, institutions, values, political commitments, but also the quality of our life. And I think Madam Minister also talked about that. And Europe is a place where this necessity of transformation is keenly perceived. In some places with, it's true, with existential dread, in others with hopes for a new unity, born out of common response to the large-scale existential threats to us all. How this inevitable transformation can be achieved, I think we have to ask the question, and again, I think Madam Minister did it, is it viable to base our response on the individual capacities of member states? She said competing among member states, as anti-European populists indeed propose today. And I know such populists, or is it rather that the challenges of the scale we face now can only be tackled together? And I hope that few would have doubts, at least in this room. And this is why an integrated Europe is geopolitically so important. It directly counteracts human subconscious retrograde impulse for breakdown, dissolution, and decay. And in the light of the geopolitical challenges, an integrated Europe appears a deep democratic alliance in terms of commitments, determination, development of resources, and also unity in action. So I think we are well prepared because of how we are and who we are. The EU, in reality, was not designed to be a geopolitical animal, but now with this geopolitical turn, activating an assertive posture has become inevitable. And our reaction to the war, I think I'm quoting here Joseph Borrell, actually gave birth to a geopolitical Europe. And the reluctance in taking responsibility for the world seems to me gone. for good, I also hope. How did it happen? I think first we have this igniting spark, which was the nagging recognition that climate and then healthcare became pertinent to our survival. And then the war and protecting peace suddenly got back on the global agenda. It's true that this war dropped like a stone on a world already mightily polarized across various national, continental, political, and social lines, and the world that was on the brink of a collective nervous breakdown due to 2 years of the pandemic, of the life under specific regime of pandemic, and the world in which there was a deep uncertainty and doubt about the wisdom and quality of world political leadership. Europe has been also affected by the Brexit saga, and also you might still remember the Washington's desire to decouple from our continent. That was not so long ago. Russia has shown itself without doubt as the disruptor of the peace in Europe. It is obvious that this aggression has to be contained, but it's also true that in a relatively short time, it has absorbed many of our material resources and political capital. And some observers see this danger that the required sacrifices still ahead of us, many of them, may induce kind of geopolitical fatigue and thus reduce our society's willingness to look at other challenges. Russia, unfortunately, is not the only lonely wolf requiring attention in the international community. There are more of them out there. And I think that it is legitimate to expect that the current and understandable concentration on the war in Ukraine will not narrow our long-term geopolitical perspective. That's also my hope. And this brings me to the issue of the global rise of China. There is an urgent need for like-minded democracies worldwide to effectively challenge the Chinese model. And the war in Ukraine is also testing now our capabilities to build global democratic alliances also in this context, in the context of China. China's interaction with the world is based on an inward consolidation through unprecedented, I think, social and political control, and also an outward expansion based on merging economic and political pressure on developing countries and also on parts of Europe, and a quest, at the same time, a quest for unabashed dominance in the world. And China's economic model distorts the global level playing field, that's clear, and their political model corrupts the worldwide prospects for democracy. That's why I think China is so dangerous. And when acting under pressure for solutions to current challenges brought by the aggression and happening also in this context, we cannot, I think, as European Union, feel freed from the obligation to reflect about the future, to focus on the future. Its main feature is definitely uncertainty, and we can't be sure whether the global order with its institutional framework that has been with us and developed for decades will even survive. It's difficult today to be sure. And UN, as we know, is the only truly global political framework we have at our disposal. And Russia, a permanent member of the Security Council, has just turned into an unprecedented aggressor. And there are countries important globally who pursue this, as they say, balanced approach. Allow me to quote just Prime Minister of Mexico, who declined to join sanctions and said, "We are not going to take any sort of economic reprisal because we want to have good relations with all the governments of the world." And there is also President Bolsonaro, whose comments we probably all know. There is South Africa and many others, and then, of course, China that I mentioned. And there is, in this context, I think, the question, who will sit at the post-war table where the future of global security architecture will be discussed and decided. Big unknown also to me is the future monetary system. as the power of sanctions is based on dominance of the dollar. And there is a risk that dollar position can be undermined. Today, renminbi role in the international trade is extremely limited. I understand that only 2% of global trade is actually priced in renminbi. But the Chinese already said that they will help the world to get rid of the dollar hegemony. They don't mention euro yet. But we'll probably hear this as well. And they are working, as you know, they are one of the most advanced jurisdictions when it comes to digital currency. We will need a lot of thinking ahead on geopolitical reordering, on the impact on the world's vulnerable, on competition between democracies and autocracies, on friend-shoring in managing supply chains. But how this multipolar world will look, nobody knows practically. And the EU must reflect on this global transformation impact on our policies, both internal and external. And we know that a lot is at stake in this context. But I also believe that the EU is very well placed to operate in such a multipolar world. And our values, our experience with bringing diversity into unity, our legislative power, strong business, global networks, empowerment also of our civil society, our capacity to build international alliances, the fact that the EU functions at a far higher level of openness and global integration than others, all that I think makes us feel that should make us feel actually that we owe the rest of the world a strong engagement in bringing the post-war world again as much as possible together. And it is important because many emergencies and political trade, sustainability, food-related, and many others require international cooperation. And now in the face of this already identified challenges, the EU has reviewed its policies aiming at serious rebalancing of our key geopolitical dossier like industry, trade, energy and security, to mention just the most important. But we need more comprehensive actions and more courageous moves on cutting off unhealthy ballast of dependencies. We talk a lot about energy, but there is also a lot of critical raw materials, including the microchips and many other supply chains-based or supply chains-related dependencies. And we have expanded in the European Union our external dossier. We fully understand today, much better than before 2-3 years ago, this need of cutting off unhealthy ballast of dependencies, how important it is. And we know that now that our trade policy is a very nimble instrument that we have in our hands, and we can be more assertive on behalf of the citizens and businesses in ensuring a level playing field and encouraging also the rest of the world to participate in our democratic standards and respect of the rule of law. We have updated also and upgraded in details actually our trade defense toolbox, revised enforcement. We revised enforcement regulation, we revised the export control system, developed a foreign subsidies mechanism, also established the FDI screening regulation, created also international procurement instrument, and we are also designing now, inspired especially by what China did to Lithuania, also an anti-coercion instrument. And we did all those before pandemic we started and the war, of course. We have also emerged from 4 years of totally dysfunctional relations with the US, especially on the trade front, but not only. And we did not only normalize in the short period of the new administration our relations with the US, but we strengthened them very deeply, I would say. Recently, the European External Action Service, they told us that we never had better relations with the US. I don't know if they are not exaggerating, but that's exactly what they are now selling to us. And after solving our harmful legacy, talking about US, so after solving all those harmful legacy trade issues, all those irritants, as we say, we launched the Trade and Technology Council, which is a cooperation platform, something we are hoping to have for years. And finally, last year in June, during the summit with US, we launched it. And this proves already to be the most useful tool at the beginning of the war, especially on export controls or investment screening, but also bringing this transatlantic unity. There is, of course, we all know we are living in this global technological race, and it is increasingly important for the sake of our businesses, their competitiveness, their resilience, that we tap into the potential of a closed transatlantic regulatory space. I think this is one of the underestimated, I think, challenges we have. There is a lot of new appointments in global standard-setting institutions where we are losing to Russia and China. So in particular in the field of artificial intelligence or emerging technologies, so this cooperation across the Atlantic on regulatory issues is extremely important, I think, in the years to come. Not to mention that apparently the average age of a European expert in all those bodies, not on the top, but at the expert level, is this age is 62, which means that we will need probably soon to have a huge number of new experts to replace the current experts. And we don't see any interest at the member states level. We don't see it in the European institutions. So this is something which I talk about that to every university I speak with, because I think that if we don't think of it today, in 10 years, all the global standards will be rooted not in values that we appreciate, but in the autocratic systems. And the good news is that the European Union has decided to move forward on delivering also security to its citizens. This was clear during the Versailles meeting. It was not at all that clear before. And on the security front, of course, where we have to establish as close relationship as possible with our partners, and the transatlantic dimension is particularly important, but we cannot continue to outsource our security to our partners. On broadly understood security. So we need also to consolidate our production and supply chains and make our economy a vital part of this broadly understood security. So in this world full of uncertainty, where actually few share our values, few share our ethics, and some actively attack them, where multilateralism is under permanent threat, and united Europe is not an option. I think many of us say that it is a necessity. And in tomorrow's multipolar world, acting in unison is the only way to ensure that Europe charts its own path, following democratic values and asserting our economy. So we must be cohesive internally, I would say, inside, and also united outside. And here let us pause for a moment and ask ourselves, and I think somebody was already, I don't know if it was not Hannes, ask ourselves, could any of us even imagine 3 years back that the Union would have had the courage and capacity, given our internal differences, to take up on itself a commitment and establish this unprecedented recovery and resilience facility and the fund and all the programs and the implementation, based on abandoning one of the decades probably long taboos, which is this reaching out to the issuance of European bonds on a big scale. And also on the external front, who could have expected that this slow, wary, or even cagey, as some perceived as Europe, to unite, would be able to unite so spectacularly on the response to the Russian aggression on Ukraine. So it surprised many that Europe can act so swiftly, and it is actually surprising that it could surprise, because that shows also that there is something wrong with us, with our perception, with the image of Europe, and that we managed to show that we are united and we can work in perfect coordination with the US and other democracies, because that was important to make sanctions as effective as possible. But we all know the weaknesses of the sanctions. But we could also see how important is the change, or was the change in this case, in the administration in Washington. So yes, it doesn't matter who is the president of the United States, I would say, when we think also about the upcoming elections. And the challenge now is to keep this European commitment to unity. And looking at the conclusions of what was already mentioned, which is the last summit on the last package of sanctions, there is no denying that potentially very hurtful fissures can be back. They actually came back. And so in my view, and I come from one of those countries, I think we should name and shame the defectors, and we should limit their potential for damage, and not only on sanctions, but also on other issues. And you might also remember that in all those discussions on the integration of the European Union some years ago, also its external role, some years ago, the concept of the open strategic autonomy has popped up to the surface, has gained very wide currency. And I see it as a kind of aspiration for courageous commitments and choices, also as an ambitious defense undertaking, as necessary trade assertiveness in the world, which we know is how it is, and also as building our own capabilities without delineating the limits of our global actions, the right to regulate, which we all confirm that, and also make choices. So strategic autonomy, autonomy's aim should not be just about guaranteeing Europe's economic, industrial, or defense potential, nor, I think, should it be just about deterring the other powers from doing us harm. It is not about Europe closing in its ranks around few public goods pursued together. I think it is about meeting the challenges in a visionary way, and it is in this context that I would like to mention a few words on enlargement in this thinking in a visionary way. We all know that European enlargement policy since the very beginning, and it was one of the most important European policies, and whatever you say about enlargement and whatever you say about how unprepared some of the member states were, I think we all know that European enlargement policy has not only made Europe more relevant globally, it has also expanded the European space of democracy and for democracy, and I find it very important. And President Macron's idea of this new European community or political community, which is open to those who want to join, but not close to those who have left. And also then Enrico Letta's, I think it was this idea of European Confederation, with aspiring member countries that would begin with a shared economic area, gradually adding commitments and eventually including a common defense clause, are, in my view, attempts of leveraging enlargement towards the direction of a slower pace, a slower process. Both ideas appeared in the context of the Ukraine's membership aspiration. And I'm not convinced by those proposals about the value added to what already exists, because if you look carefully into those proposals, they're actually describing what we already have, and maybe not always well implemented. So what is our interest to repeat this? And I think it is visible to many, probably, the criteria that were initially designed to bring new countries on board smoothly, have in time evolved into an obstacle race with an ever-moving finish line, perceived to rather keep countries out for as long as possible. As a result, I think we have this disappointment, and we have also skepticism that have been growing in the candidate countries, feeding the rhetoric of far-right policies. We have to be aware of this link, and this is the case of Western Balkans. And I think we are 20 years after the Thessaloniki summit. It's hard to believe where we are those 20 years later. So I think that enlargement process has always encompassed more than just this particular moment of accession when you have to prove you meet criteria. I think the enlargement process has always had tremendous political value and very long-term consequences of this process, positive consequences of this process if it was handled properly. So I think that in light of dramatically changed political circumstances, enlargement paths could be a more subtle process, responsive to changing circumstances, and I hope we will put during the summit in June, it's I think mid-June, we will put Ukraine on the enlargement path. I'm not saying we will decide overnight to get them in. I'm saying put them on enlargement path, because this is the path where you can help the countries, when you can work together. Especially, they are not starting from scratch, as we know very well. They are all associated countries. So this is extremely important, and I think we should ask also ourselves whether Ukraine will be an added value to the European Union. And there is, of course, a lot of issues which are raised, negative, critical. But my feeling is that while enlarging this democratic European space, in the long term, Ukraine will give the EU, geopolitically speaking, which I think will be important in the years and maybe decades to come, an additional weight in the global bargaining for status, for resources, for demography. So I have this feeling that many politicians in Europe, used to a status quo, because that's always an option, are afraid of accepting Ukraine as an EU member. And the list of concerns exists, and there are many of them which are legitimate. We just probably all agree on this. But there is something more important than this, and I can only hope that the fear of making Mr. Putin feel provoked by our attitude to Ukraine is not on this long list of no's. We have to look into the EU's past also in this context. We tend to forget when the founding fathers were faced with a more problematic case. You remember, Germany was the enemy that inflicted a terrible scar on millions of people. But Schuman and Monnet, they took the bold risk of bringing the former enemy into the fold of democracy and freedom. And it was, I think, the only way forward, and it was a resounding success. And we Europeans were able to help our war enemy to become an equal partner in our common enterprise for peace. It would be a shame if you could not be there for Ukraine, which is the victim of brutal aggression, and our ally for democracy, our friend and partner in making Europe a strong actor in the world. It has to be said that geopolitics today, I don't know about you, but I always just, I think both in all the discourses, this notion, or also as a political practice of great powers, I never saw the great reputation in this notion of geopolitics. But we are witnessing this discredited geopolitics in Ukraine, where the aggressor simply grabs the land of another country and sets arbitrary borders, completely ignoring international law. And we as a union, we have to make clear that our geopolitics is not of that kind. And we in Europe understand it. But I fear that people from other continents do not see this aggression as something else than just another case of traditional geopolitical conflict in which all parties are equally guilty. And I gave you some examples of those. And also when Pope Francis said, "We are all guilty," you might have heard, it caused great indignation in the western part of the globe. But not elsewhere. I think the Pope does represent the view from the periphery, and this is what the periphery thinks. Periphery with all the positive understanding. That means that one of our main tasks now is getting the message across to others that have doubts. And how can we do it? Well, I think we need to put it in a broader framework of democratic struggle across the globe, link it to freedom-loving people in Taiwan or in Hong Kong, and do, of course, more to provide hope to the African continent. And we need to see this finest political settlement of the post-World War II, which is the European Union, as an evolving community that needs to be refined by each and every generation to to fit to their needs and dreams. And in other words, I think we need to look at ourselves not by the glasses that correct the short-sightedness, but by the lenses of history. And our historical task is leaping forward, not, if I can just go back to what we were saying, I think 20 years ago, not muddling through history. And I have a good friend, Victoria Martín de la Torre, who wrote a book about the fathers of the European Union, and she describes succinctly in her book European integration as an epoch-making leap into the unknown. And we shouldn't be afraid, I think, of unknown. I think the founding fathers, I still believe there were some mothers, but we have not discovered, saw with clarity that post-World War II Europe needed a new start. And if Monet and Schumann were alive today, I think they would certainly feel the same now. So this would tell us that unity is not an option. They would tell us that unity is not an option, it is a necessity. And it is obvious that I think following generations also added their own insights into how we should proceed with the project of European integration. And we moved from what it was at the beginning, which was this elite project, a small number of member states and the population. And of course, at that time, the second half of Europe, divided by the Iron Curtain, was absent from shaping the Union. And we stayed on the other bank of the river, like Spain and Portugal, till we successfully transformed ourselves into democracy. And now we are a pan-European community. And member states are the vital part. Institutions, European institutions are its vital part, but they are here at the service of the European people. And this is my last message, that the European Union is all about people. And I think that to be successful, we must be legitimate to the people, and also on the citizen-centered union. Somebody said for citizens and by citizens Europe. This is something which I think we need for the future, and we have to look very pragmatically at it, not only as ideal, even though it's an important ideal, but we have to also look pragmatically. Globalization is not dead, but it's getting a hard look and most likely will evolve. Difficult to say in what direction. Autocracies are gaining popular support, and the global economy is struggling with all the tremors of... should I finish? Yes, I felt this, you know. We women feel those things, yes. So we need European public opinion on our side, and thus I would like to mention, just to finish, because I don't know if you had it in Austria well represented. We just finished this conference on the future of Europe, and there were citizens, there are recommendations, and there are ideas that change of the treaty is not a taboo anymore in Europe. If there is a need to change the treaty should be changed, and there is, for those who are interested, a long list in the Parliament resolutions, a long list of issues that we might look at when hopefully having the convention. So we are now in this discussion among the European institutions on the basis of citizens' recommendations, discussing how can we have the convention and what should be really this Europe based on what we discussed during the conference with the citizens, that would make it really a Europe that will have this legitimacy for decades to come, and that at the same time will give us all the instruments we need, even though, as I probably said or wanted to say, that if you look at what we have done over the last 2 years without treaty change, that shows also the flexibility in the treaty change, and we should use it fully. Thank you, and sorry if I was wrong.